Green Party leader Elizabeth May got clearance to review the unredacted NSICOP report on foreign interference. That report, which was made public last week, contains the findings of a committee of parliamentarians with top secret security clearance. Part of what the report outlined was the existence of intelligence on an unspecified number of parliamentarians who had wittingly aided foreign states. Ms. May's takeaway, as you heard there, a sigh of relief. But MPs in the House of Commons today didn't appear to agree, voting to send the issue to the Foreign Interference Inquiry.
We support expanding Justice Hoag's mandate to review these issues in an appropriate way, in a way that respects national security considerations.
And the co-leader of the Green Party, Elizabeth May, is here with us in studio live now. Hi, Ms. May. Good to see you. Thank you for making the time.
Good. Thank you for having me.
I wanted to ask you first about the prospect of naming names and how it stacks up against what you read, essentially because that's been the nexus of the political debate over the past few days. Does this report name names?
First of all, just in this last few seconds, you said something that I just want to kind of tweak, if it's okay to correct. The report says there are MPs who have wittingly or unwittingly. So that's really important. So where there are names mentioned of MPs in the unredacted confidential version, those MPs haven't, there isn't the evidence that they have consciously aided and abetted a foreign government. The only example in the entire unredacted version of the report of the committee, of the National Security Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians, is found on page 26 of the public report, which is a former MP who proactively, is the word they use in the report, tried to provide and did provide information they knew to be confidential. Wittingly, but more than that, proactively. This former MP reached out and also had contacts and a relationship with an officer from a foreign government and then provided information from Canadian confidential sources to a foreign government. That's, I mean, if there's lines to cross, that's no gray zone there. That's outrageous. And the only time in reading the whole unredacted confidential report that any member of Parliament was referenced as having done anything like that. So for me, that was a relief, because in the last week or so, we've begun to feel that we could be, I mean, so many reporters have asked me, how does it feel to serve when you don't know who you can trust and so on. So yeah, that's
why we highlighted the Witting in the introduction, right? Because that has been the focus of all the reactions so far. When you talk about the descriptions, basically the rest of it mentioned being about unwitting participation, like what can you share in that respect? And are those members of Parliament named?
There are other names, very, very, I said in the press conference, fewer than a handful people named. I mean, one of the people named is already in the public domain. Han Dong certainly had, as the published report has said, interference that aided his nomination efforts in a Liberal riding. That's known. That's in the public report. To the extent that other people are named, that must remain confidential for reasons of security.
And does the report conclude, just to kind of put a finer point on what you're talking about, that those MPs were all unwittingly involved? Like, is that conclusion reached, or is just some intelligence presented?
It remains an open question for, and I think probably requires further investigation, but it's not presented in the black and white sense of the way the former MP who proactively provided intelligence. That, for one thing, is a higher class of offense than, did you have willful blindness if people showed up at a nomination meeting and you probably should have figured out that those people were trying to influence you down the road because they're from a foreign government. That's, or supported. I mean,
Are you uncomfortable with that, though, even? And I understand that there's a different bar, but isn't that of concern as well?
It is a concern, but that's foreign influence, but no action by a sitting MP favoring another government over, or betraying Canada to a foreign government. So this is the question. There's influence and there's interference. People could be co-opted with or without their knowledge. They may just, again, the question of willful blindness is something else, but are laws broken, but is national security compromised? Is your loyalty to Canada compromised, or have you put yourself in a situation where you could be down the road subject to someone saying, well, we helped you out then, so it's quid pro quo. But the quid pro quo, as far as I can see, in any of, as far as reading the report, again, I can express not what I read word for word, because of course that's still confidential. I can express how I felt when I read it. And I felt vastly relieved because there's no list of names, nor are there names that one could assemble from different places in the report and say there's a number of sitting MPs who have betrayed Canada. No, that's not the case.
So how do we square the circle with what was public until now and the conclusion you reached? Because I think the reason there was the reaction there was, and the reporters were asking you that question, is because of the way that it was presented. Yes, it was partially redacted, but even the description of the redactions made it seem like this was something not necessarily happening extensively, but that it was happening in more than one instance.
I'd have to say a careful reading will not show in the public version an accusation that there were MPs, plural, involved in proactively providing information that they should not have to a foreign government. In other words, the question of are there MPs who have developed cozy relationships with foreign governments and ought to have known better? Yeah. Are there MPs who have betrayed Canada through taking proactive steps to betray their country or favor a foreign government over Canada? No. Do we have problems within our political system that we're an easy, soft target in Canada, that we need to buttress our democratic institutions and take steps? And I think we do need to. And one of them that I would like to see enforced is that when we take our oath of office as MPs, that our loyalty is to Canada. That is not actually enforced. And one would want to make sure that MPs understand your loyalty to Canada means you're not going to take some private contract that benefits you a lot if you're testifying against your own government in a secret trial, for example, which an MP actually has done in this country. And when I brought it to the ethics commissioner years ago, the decision was, well, that really didn't violate any of our ethics codes. Well, I think it should, and I think that requires further work. And the ethics commissioner could open up a channel with intelligence services to know in advance proactively and say to an MP, as they do when they're double checking what we've reported as benefits or gifts, check out this relationship and make sure people understand their oath. You wouldn't think you'd have to explain it, but your oath is to Canada, your loyalty is to Canada, not your private interests, and certainly not to any foreign country.
As far as the broader issue, there was a vote that took place not long ago. You were, among the very few, just your party, that voted against it to send the issue to the foreign interference inquiry. I understand how you might not see the utility now that you've read it, but just even based on what you've said in this conversation about the possibility of how willfully blind MPs were. Like, is there not merit to that being further studied? And could the inquiry be the venue for that?
I initially thought so. Honestly, Vesey, I was prepared to vote for the Bloc Québécois motion before I read the report. Day before yesterday, I thought, yeah, well, that's we've got to put it somewhere. And I realized, this foreign interference report and the loyalty of MPs to Canada is a hot potato, but I think throwing it to Madam Justice Hogue is throwing it in the wrong soup pot. For one thing, they've got a mandate in the Hogue inquiry. They've got a short timeline to deliver. But even with that short timeline, it would leave Canadians in the dark for a very long time about what's in this report if we wait for Madam Justice Hogue to report. Even if she was able to handle this additional mandate, what can she report more than what I'm telling you now? I don't think much. So what do we do to actually get to the bottom of it? I'd like to see elected members of Parliament, leaders of all the parties, and right now I know Monsieur Blanchet is getting his top secret security clearance. I understand that tomorrow Jagmeet Singh is going to have the same access to the report that I have had. I think we should all sit down together, people who have top secret security clearance, with the advice of the security and intelligence experts within the government of Canada, and try to figure out what can we do to advance this issue beyond where it is right now. There's those MPs that I've mentioned who wittingly or unwittingly became subject to some foreign influence. There's at least one case of a former MP. I think that former MP, I think that should be investigated and prosecuted and dragged out in public. And there are also people elected at other levels of government and in other governments that we ought to figure out what do we do about that. That's foreign involvement and foreign interference in multiple places within the Canadian democratic system.
Okay, I have leave our conversation there. I appreciate you making the time, Ms. May. Thank you so much.